Alrighty. Well, hello. Welcome to my humble abode.
Alrighty. Well, hello.
Ooh, hearing myself in an echo.
Well.
Alrighty. So, so we're trying to catch back up on the stream. So it's been a long time, but I am going to be going through the first 5 chapters of this book over here, the Enola Holmes mystery, Case of the Missing Marquess, in preparation for the film that will be coming out eventually, starring Millie Bobby Brown as the title character. So, I already streamed the first 5 chapters, but I forgot to save it. So this is just re-streaming the first 5 chapters, and I'll post the entirety of this book on YouTube. So my little YouTube username's down there. If you want to catch up, watch the first 3, the first book. And if I have time tonight, depending on how long this takes, which I have a wide open evening, so if I have the time tonight, I will go ahead and do the first 5 chapters of this book, stop the stream, and then restart, and we'll do the next book, which is The Case of the Left-Handed Lady. I believe that's the title. Yeah. So, I know, wide open evening. So, I'm going to turn my ceiling fan on because it's a little toasty in here. So, sorry if that bothers you up there, but I can see it, kind of, but maybe you can't. So, without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So, The Case of the Missing Marquess, an Enola Holmes mystery by Nancy Springer. The introduction. In the East End of London, after dark, August, 1888. The only light struggles from the few gas street lamps that remain unbroken, and from pots of fire suspended above the cobblestones tended by old men selling boiled sea snails outside the public houses. The stranger, all dressed in black from her hat to her boots, slips from shadow to shadow, as if she were no more than a shadow herself, unnoticed. Where she comes from, it is unthinkable for a female to venture out at night without the escort of a husband, father, or brother, but she will do whatever she must in order to search for the one who is lost. Wide-eyed beneath her black veil, she scans, seeks, watches as she walks. She sees broken glass on the cracked pavements. She sees rats boldly walking about, trailing their disgusting hairless tails. She sees ragged children running barefoot amid the rats and the broken glass. She sees couples, men in red flannel vests and women in cheap straw bonnets, reeling along arm in arm. She sees someone lying along a wall, drunk or asleep amid the rats, or maybe even dead. Looking, she also listens. Somewhere a hurdy-gurdy spews a jingle into the city air. The black-veiled seeker hears that tipsy music. She hears the little girl calling, "Daddy? Dad?" Outside the door of a pub. She hears screams, laughter, drunken cries, street vendors calling, "Oysters! Sauce 'em in vinegar and swallow 'em whole! Fattens 4 for a penny!" She smells the vinegar. She smells gin, boiled cabbage, and hot sausage, the salty waft of the nearby harbor and the stench of the River Thames. She smells rotting fish. She smells raw sewage. She quickens her pace. She must keep moving, for not only is she a seeker, but she is sought. The black-veiled hunter is hunted. She must walk far so that the men who are pursuing her cannot find her. At the next street lamp she sees a woman with painted lips and smudged eyes waiting in a doorway. A hansom cab drives up, stops, and a man in a tailcoat and shining silk top hat gets out. Even though the woman in the doorway wears a low-cut evening gown that might once have belonged to a lady of a gentleman's social class, the black-clad watcher does not think the gentleman is here to go dancing. She sees the prostitute's haggard eyes, haunted with fear no matter how much her red-smeared lips smile. One like her was once recently found dead, a few streets away, slit wide open. Averting her gaze, the searcher in black walks on. An unshaven man lounging against a wall winks at her. "Missus, what are you doing all alone? Don't you want some company?" If he were a gentleman, he would not have spoken to her without being introduced. Ignoring him, she hastens past. She must speak to no one. She does not belong here. The knowledge does not trouble her, for she has never belonged anywhere, and in a sense she has always been alone. But her heart is not without pain as she scans the shadows, for she has no home now. She is a stranger in the world's largest city, and she does not know where she will lay her head tonight. And if, Lord willing, she lives until morning, she can only hope to find the loved one for whom she is searching. Deeper and deeper into the shadows and East London dockside slums, she walks on, alone. That's the end of the intro. Boiled sea snails. Yes. Oh, I pronounced the River Thames incorrectly for a very, very long time. So, I feel ya. No worries there. A week ago? Oh, terror. Yep. Us Americans just don't know how to pronounce things properly. So. Alrighty. Chapter the 1st. I would very much like to know why my mother named me Enola, which backwards spells alone. Mum was, or perhaps still is, fond of ciphers, and she must have had something in mind, whether foreboding or a sort of left-handed blessing, or, already, plans, even though my father had not yet passed away. In any event, "You will do very well on your own, Enola," she would tell me nearly every day as I was growing up. Indeed, this was her usual absent-minded farewell as she went off with the sketchbook, brushes, and watercolors to roam the countryside. And indeed, alone was very much how she left me. When on the July evening of my 14th birthday she neglected to return to Ferndale Hall, our home. As I had my celebration anyway, with Lane the butler and his wife the cook, the absence of my mother did not at first trouble me. Although cordial enough when we met, Mum and I seldom interfered in one another's concerns. I assumed that some urgent business kept her elsewhere, especially as she had instructed Mrs. Lane to give me certain parcels at tea-time. Mum's gift to me consisted of a drawing kit, paper, lead pencils, a penknife for sharpening them, and Indian rubber erasers all cleverly arranged in a flat wooden box that opened into an easel. A stout book entitled The Meanings of Flowers, including also notes upon the messages conveyed by fans, handkerchiefs, sealing wax, and postage stamps, and a much smaller book of ciphers. While I could draw only to a limited degree, Mother encouraged the small knack I had. She knew I enjoyed my sketching as I enjoyed reading almost any book on whatever topic, but as for ciphers she knew I did not much care for them. Nevertheless, she had made this little book for me with her own hands, as I could plainly see, folding and stitching together pages she had decorated with dainty watercolor flowers. Obviously she had been at work on this gift for some time. She did not lack thought for me, I told myself, firmly, several times throughout the evening. While I had no idea where Mum might be, I expected she would either come home or send message during the night. I slept peacefully enough. However, the next morning, Lane shook his head. No, the lady of the house had not returned. No, there had been no word from her. Outside, grey rain fell, fitting my mood, which grew more and more uneasy. After breakfast, I trotted back upstairs to my bedroom, a pleasant refuge where the wardrobe, washstand, dresser, and so forth were painted white with pink and blue stenciled posies around the edges. Cottage furniture, folk called it, cheap stuff, suitable only for a child, but I liked it. Most days. Not today. I could not have stayed indoors. Indeed, I could not sit down except hastily to pull galoshes over my boots. I wore shirt and knickerbockers, comfortable clothing that had previously belonged to my older brothers, and over these I threw a waterproof. All rubbery, I thumped downstairs and took an umbrella from the stand in the hallway. Then I exited through the kitchen, telling Mrs. Lane, "I'm going to have a look around." Odd. These were the same words I said nearly every day when I went out to look for things, though generally I didn't know what. Anything. I would climb trees just to see what might be there, snail shells with bands of maroon and yellow, nut clusters, birds' nests, and if I found a magpie's nest I would look for things in it, shoe buttons, bits of shiny ribbon, somebody's lost earring. I would pretend that something of great value was lost and I was searching. Only this time I was not pretending. Mrs. Lane, too, knew it was different this time. She should have called, "Where's your hat, Miss Enola?" for I never wore one, but she said nothing as she watched me go. Go to have a look around for my mother. I really thought I could find her myself. Once out of sight of the kitchen, I began running back and forth like a beagle, hunting for any sign of Mum. Yesterday morning, as a birthday treat, I had been allowed to lie abed, therefore I had not seen my mother go out. But assuming that she had, as usual, spent some hours drawing studies of flowers and plants, I looked for her first on the grounds of Ferndale. Managing her estate, Mum liked to let growing things alone. I rambled through flower gardens run wild, lawns invaded by gorse and brambles, forests shrouded in grape and ivy vines, and all the while the grey sky wept rain on me. The old collie dog Reginald trotted along with me until he grew tired of getting wet, then left to find shelter. Sensible creature. Soaked to my knees, I knew I should do likewise, but I could not. My anxiety had accelerated along with my gait until now terror drove me like a lash. Terror that my mother lay out here somewhere, hurt or sick, a fear I could not entirely deny, as one was far from young. She might have been struck down by heart failure. She might be... But one could not even think it so badly. There were other words. Expired, crossed over, passed away, gone to join my father. No, please. One would think that, as Mother and I were not close, I should not have minded her disappearance very much, but quite the contrary. I felt dreadful, because it seemed all my fault if anything had gone badly with her. Always I felt to blame for breathing, because I had been born indecently late in Mother's life, a scandal, a burden, you see, and always I had counted upon setting things right after I was grown. Someday I hoped somehow I would make out of my life a shining light that would lift me out of the shadow of disgrace. And then, you understand, my mother would love me. So she had to be alive, and I must find her. Searching, I crisscrossed forests where generations of squires had hunted hares and grouse. I climbed down and up the shelving, fern-draped rock of the grotto for which the estate was named, a place I loved, but today I did not linger. I continued to the edge of the park where the woods ended and the farmland began, and I searched onward into the fields, for Mum may very well have gone there for the sake of flowers. Being not too far from the city, Ferndale tenants had taken to farming bluebells and pansies and lilies instead of vegetables, as they could better prosper by delivering fresh blossoms daily to Covent Garden. Here grew rows of roses, crops of coreopsis, flaming patches of zinnias and poppies, all for London. Looking into the fields of flowers, I dreamt of a bright city where every day smiling maids placed fresh bouquets in every chamber of the mansions, where every evening gentlewomen and royal ladies decked and scented themselves, their hair and gowns with anemones. It's like a sea plant. And violets. London, where... But today the acres of flowers hung sodden with rain, and my dreams of London lasted only a breath or two before evaporating like the mist steaming up from the fields. Vast fields. Miles of fields. But where was Mother? In my dreams, you see, my Mum dreams, not my London ones, I would find her myself. I would be a heroine. She would gaze up at me in gratitude and adoration when I rescued her. But those were dreams, and I was a fool. So far I had searched only a quarter of the estate, much less the farmlands. If Mum lay injured, she'd give up the ghost before I could find her all by myself. Turning, I hurried back to the hall. There, Lane and Mrs. Lane swooped upon me like a pair of turtle-doves upon the nest, he plucking sopping coat and umbrella and boots from me, she hustling me towards the kitchen to get warm. While it was not her place to scold me, she made her views plain. A person would have to be simple-minded to stay out in the rain for hours on end, she told the big, coal-burning stove as she levered one of its lids off. Don't matter whether a person is common or aristocrat, if a person catches a chill, it could kill her. This to the tea kettle she was placing on the stove. Consumption is no respecter of persons or circumstances, to the tea canister. There was no need for me to respond, for she wasn't talking to me. She would not have been permitted to say anything of the sort to me. It's all very well for a person to be of an independent mind without looking for quinsy or pleurisy or pneumonia or worse, to the teacups. Then she turned to face me, and her tone was about-faced. Begging your pardon, Miss Enola, will you take luncheon? Won't you draw your chair closer to the stove? I'll brown like toast if you do. No, I do not require luncheon. Has there been any word of Mother? Although I already knew the answer, for Lane or Mrs. Lane would have told me at once if they had heard anything. Still, I could not help asking. Nothing, miss. She swaddled her hands in her apron as if wrapping a baby. I stood. Then there are some notes I must write. Miss Enola, there's no fire in the library. Let me bring the things to you here at the table, miss. I felt just as glad not to have to sit in the great leather chair in that gloomy room. Into the warm kitchen Mrs. Lane fetched paper imprinted with our family crest, the inkpot and the fountain pen from the library desk along with some blotting paper. Dipping the pen into the ink on the cream-colored stationery, I wrote a few words to the local constabulary, informing them that my mother seemed to have gone astray and requesting them to kindly organize a search for her. Then I sat thinking, did I really have to? Unfortunately, yes, I could put it off no longer. More slowly I wrote another note, one that would soon wing for miles via wire to be printed out by a teletype machine as, Lady Eudora Vernet Holmes missing since yesterday. Stop. Please advise. Stop. Enola Holmes. I directed this wire to Mycroft Holmes of Pall Mall in London, and also the same message to Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street, also in London. My brothers. It's the end of the first chapter. Well, hello! Thank you for hosting. Thanks, guys! I'm gonna scroll back and read. Galoshes is just a fun-sounding word, but I don't know anybody that has any. I feel like that's a northern thing, like galoshes in the snow, but like in the South, nobody wears galoshes, so. Oh, thanks for clapping. Sorry, I'm really slow reading. Oh, should probably take the cap off my water before I drink it. No, I think galoshes are different than rain boots. It's like galoshes are designed to go over your shoes, and rain boots are like in place of shoes, I think is how it works. But I don't know, because I don't own any. Yeah, well, thanks for joining, Topi, best friend. I should have a little command for you, but I don't have a bot or that kind of time, so, and I never stream, so it wouldn't really make any difference. But thanks, best friend. So yeah, I'm just reading the first 5 chapters, and then I'll probably stop stream and then start the second book, because I've already read all these other chapters. We're just kind of catching up here. So I can put these on YouTube, and people can watch them, watch the whole first book if they want, and then catch up and watch the second, and we'll just go on and on. There's a total of 6 books in the series, so my goal is to eventually read through all of them. That was going to be my goal for 2018, but we're like halfway through, and I'm not even really done with the first book, so I don't think that's actually going to happen, but thanks! It's a pretty cool shirt. It's my Stranger Things shirt in honor of Stranger Things. It's actually not in honor of anything. I just put the shirt on today, but it is kind of fitting because one of the stars of this show is going to be the star of this movie when this book becomes a movie. No, I'm not going to read all 6 books tonight. No, I feel like that would be a marathon stream. Maybe we could do that sometime. Maybe I could just marathon it. Just start at like 6 a.m. and just read all day long. I could have done that today if I'd thought about it. But I did have homework I had to do today, so no, I will not be reading all 6 books tonight. So, alrighty. Starting the next chapter. If you guys think of anything that I should put like at the top of my screen, like text-wise, anything that's like helpful that you've noticed during. Oh no, that's not what I'm saying at all, Tara. Thanks, but no, that will not be happening. If you guys think of anything that I should put at the top of my screen here to like help people when they go to watch this, I put my YouTube thing down here. No, I am not going to 6 a.m. No, there's nothing going on about 6 a.m. this weekend. Okay? Maybe someday I'll have so much free time that I could do that, but not in the foreseeable future. You guys are nuts. Chapter the 2nd. After sipping the tea urged upon me by Mrs. Lane, I changed to dry knickerbockers and started off to deliver my notes to the village. But the rain, the wet, Dick will take them, Mrs. Lane offered, wringing her hands in her apron again. Her grown son, she meant, who did odd jobs around the estate while Reginald, the somewhat more intelligent collie dog, supervised him. Rather than tell Mrs. Lane I did not trust Dick with this important errand, I said, I shall make some inquiries while I'm there. I will take the bicycle. This was not some old high-wheeled bone shaker, but an up-to-date dwarf bicycle with pneumatic tires, perfectly safe. Pedaling through the drizzle, I stopped for a moment at the lodge. Ferndale is small for a hall, really only a stone house with its chest puffed out, so to speak, but it needs must have a drive, a gate, and therefore a lodge. Cooper, I asked the lodge-keeper, would you open the gate for me? And by the way, do you happen to recall opening it for my mother yesterday? To which, not quite masking his astonishment at such a question, he replied in the negative. At no time had Lady Eudora Holmes passed this way. After he had led me out, I pedaled the short distance to Conford village. At the post office I sent my telegrams, then I left off my note at the constabulary and spoke with the officer before I began my rounds. I stopped at the vicarage, the greengrocer's, the bakery, the confectionery, the butcher shop, the fishmonger's, and so forth, inquiring after my mother as discreetly as I could. No one had seen her. The vicar's wife, among others, raised her eyebrows at me. I supposed it was because of my knickerbockers. For public cycling, you see, I should have been wearing rationals, bloomers covered by a waterproof skirt, or indeed any kind of skirt long enough to conceal my ankles. I knew my mother was criticized for failing properly to drape vulgar surfaces such as coal scuttles on the back of her patio, and me. The shocking child that I was. I never questioned my disgrace, for to do so would have been to broach matters of which a nice girl must remain ignorant. I had observed, however, that most married women disappeared into the house every year or two, emerging several months later with a new child, to the number of perhaps a dozen, until they either ceased or expired. My mother, by comparison, had produced only my two much older brothers. Somehow this prior restraint made my late arrival all the more shameful for a gentleman, rationalist, logician, is that how you say? Like logician, but it's with a C, like magician. Logician, and his well-bred artistic wife. The eyebrow-raisers bent their heads together and whispered as I pedaled around Kindford again, this time inquiring at the inn, the smithy, the tobacconists, and the public house, places where nice females seldom set foot. I learned nothing. And despite my best smiles and by-the-way manner, I could almost hear a crescendo of excited gossip, conjecture, and rumor rising behind me as I returned to Ferndale Hall in an unhappy state of mind. No one has seen her, I answered Mrs. Lane's mute, questioning glance, or has any idea where she might be. Again waving aside her offers of luncheon, and although now it was nearly tea-time, I trudged upstairs to my mother's suite of rooms and stood outside the hallway door, considering. Mum kept her door locked. To spare Mrs. Lane the trouble, supposedly, for Lane and Mrs. Lane were the only house servants, Mum cleaned her rooms herself. She hardly ever allowed anyone to enter, but under the circumstances, I decided to go ahead. Laying my hand upon the doorknob, I fully expected I would have to hunt up Lane to get the key, but the knob turned in my grasp. The door opened, and I knew in that moment, if I had not known before, that everything had changed. Looking about me in the hush of my mother's sitting room, I felt rather more worshipful than if I were in a chapel. I had read Father's logic books, you see, and Malthus and Darwin, like my parents, I held rational and scientific views, but being in Mum's room made me feel as if I wanted to believe. In something. The soul, perhaps, or the spirit. Mum had made this room a sanctuary of the artistic spirit. Panels of Japanese lotus-patterned silk dressed the windows, drawn back to let in the light upon slender furnishings of maple wood carved to resemble bamboo, very different from the hulking dark mahogany in the parlor. Down there all the wood was varnished, heavy serge draped the windows, and from the walls stared grim oil portraits of ancestors, but here in my mother's domain the wood had been painted white, and on pastel walls hung 100 delicate watercolors. Mum's airy, lovingly detailed renditions of flowers, each picture no larger than a sheet of writing paper, lightly framed. For a moment I felt as if Mum were here in this room, and had been here the whole time. Would that it were so. Softly, as if I might disturb her, I tiptoed into the next room. Her studio, a plain room with bare windows for the sake of light, and a bare oak floor for the sake of cleaning. Scanning the easel, the tilted art table, the shelves of paper and supplies, I caught sight of the wooden box and frowned. Wherever Mum had gone, she had not taken her watercolor kit with her. But I had assumed... How very stupid of me. I should have looked here first. She had not gone out to study flowers at all. She had gone. Somewhere. Some why. I simply did not know, and how I had ever thought I could find her myself. I was stupid, stupid, stupid. My steps heavy now, I walked through the next door into Mum's bedroom, and halted, astonished for several reasons. First and foremost, the state of Mum's shining modern brass bed, unmade. Every morning of my life, Mum had seen to it that I made my bed and tidied my room immediately after breakfast. Surely she would not leave her own bed with linens thrown back and pillows askew and eider-down comforters sliding onto the Persian carpet. Moreover, her clothes had not been properly put away. Her brown tweed walking suit had been most carelessly thrown over the top of the standing mirror. But if not her customary walking outfit with its skirt that could be drawn up by strings so that only petticoats need get wet or soiled, yet let down at a moment's notice should a male appear on the horizon. If not this very practical, up-to-date garment for the country, then what had she worn? Parting the velvet drapes to admit light from the windows, I threw open the wardrobe doors, then stood, trying to make sense of the jumble of clothing inside. Wool, worsted, muslin, and cotton, but also damask, silk, tulle, and velvet. Mum was, you see, very much a free thinker, a woman of character, a proponent of female suffrage and dress reform, including the soft, loose, aesthetic gowns advocated by Ruskin, but also, whether she liked it or not, she was a squire's widow with certain obligations. So there were walking costumes and rationals, but also formal visiting dresses, a low-necked dinner dress, an opera cloak, and a ball gown, the same rusty purple one Mum had worn for years. She did not care whether she was in fashion, nor did she throw anything away. There were the black widow's weeds she had worn for a year after my father's demise. There was a bronze-green habit left over from her fox-hunting days. There was her gray-caped pavement-sweeping suit for city wear. There were fur mantles, quilted satin jackets, paisley skirts, blouses upon blouses. I could not make out what garments might be missing from that bewilderment of mauve, maroon, gray-blue, lavender, olive, black, amber, and brown. Closing the wardrobe doors I stood, puzzled, looking about me. The entire room was in disarray. The two halves, or stays, of a corset, along with other unmentionables, lay in plain sight on the marble-topped washstand, and upon the dresser sat a peculiar object like a cushion, but all of a poof, made of coils and clouds of white horsehair. I lifted this odd thing, rather springy to the touch, and making no sense of it, I carried it along with me on my way out of my mother's rooms. In the downstairs hallway I encountered Lane polishing the woodwork. Showing him my find, I asked him, "Lane, what is this?" As a butler, he did his very best to remain expressionless, but he stammered slightly as he replied, "That is, a dress improver, Miss Enola." Dress improver? But not for the front, surely. Therefore it must be for the rear. Oh. I held in my hands, in a public room of the hall, in the presence of a male, the unwhisperable that hid inside a gentlewoman's bustle supporting its folds and draperies. "I beg your pardon," I exclaimed, feeling the heat of blush rise in my face. "I had no idea. Never having worn a bustle, I had not seen such an item before. 1,000 apologies." But an urgent thought conquered my embarrassment. "Lane," I asked, "in what manner was my mother dressed when she left the house yesterday morning?" "It's difficult to recall, miss. Was she carrying any sort of baggage or parcel?" "No, indeed, miss." "Not even a reticule or handbag?" "No, miss." "Mother seldom carried anything of the sort. I think I would have noticed if she were." Mother seldom carried anything of the sort. This is Lane talking. "I think I would have noticed if she were." "Was she by chance wearing a costume with the word bustle would be indelicate when speaking to a male. With a train?" "Very unlike her, if so." But with memory dawning in his eyes, Lane nodded. "I cannot bring to mind her exact apparel, Miss Enola, but I do recall she wore her turkey-back jacket. The kind of jacket that would accommodate a bustle. And her high-crowned gray hat. I knew that hat. Meant to be military in appearance, resembling an upside-down flower-pot. It was sometimes by the vulgar called a 3 stories and a basement. And she carried her walking umbrella. A long black implement meant to be used like a cane, as sturdy as a gentleman's stick. How odd that my mother would go out with a mannish umbrella, a mannish hat, yet swishing that most flirtatious feminine tail, a bustle. That's the end of the 2nd chapter. Oh my gosh. Okay, so 8 a.m. No. 6:30 a.m. start time. No. She's gonna get so annoyed. High five! No, that's great. High five. You guys are great. Thanks, guys. Yeah, I could do that. I could say that I'll reply to messages between chapters. Welcome back. Yay, clapping for chapter 2. 3 more chapters. And then we'll do the next book. This is going to, if anybody is watching this on YouTube, you guys are going to think this is really confusing, but I promise it's not. I promise it's not that confusing. I should probably mark this so that I know where I'm going. Go. Stretching. I've got this like twinge in my neck. I don't know what I did. Stretch. Stretching my back. Oh, felt that. Alrighty. Take a drink of water. Alright, next chapter. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'll just put them all in the order of the book chapters. It'll all work out. Be great. Be so great. I'm trying to make sure my OBS is working okay. Alrighty. Next chapter. Chapter the 3rd. Which I think it's so fancy. Chapter the 3rd. It's just so, like on Adventure Time. You guys remember that? Anyways. Chapter the 3rd. Just before dinner time, a boy brought a reply from my brothers. Arriving first morning train, Chaucerley. Stop. Please meet at station. Stop. M and S. Holmes. Chaucerley. The nearest town with a railway station lay 10 miles beyond Kindford. In order to meet the early train, I would have to set off at dawn. In preparation that evening, I bathed. Quite a bother, dragging the metal tub out from under the bed and placing it before the hearth, hauling buckets of water upstairs, and then tea kettles of boiling water to pour in for warmth. Mrs. Lane was of no help, for even though it was summertime, she needs must build a fire in my... I think that's a typo. Yeah, I think that's a typo. I don't think that's phrasing. All the while declaring to the kindling the coals and finally the flames that no sane person would bathe on such a damp day. I wanted to wash my hair also, but I could not do so without Mrs. Lane's assistance, and she developed a sudden rheumatism in her arms while declaring to the towel she was heating, "It's no more than 3 weeks since the last time, and the weather not nearly warm enough." I bundled into bed directly after my bath, and Mrs. Lane, still muttering, placed hot water bottles at my feet. In the morning I brushed my hair a full 100 strokes, trying to render it glossy, then tied it back with a white ribbon to match my frock. Girls of the upper class must wear white, you know, to show every fleck of dirt. I wore my newest, least soiled frock with very nice white lace pantalettes below, and the traditional black stockings with black boots, freshly polished by Lane. After so much dressing at such an early hour, I had no time for breakfast. Snatching a shawl from the rack in the hallway, for it was a very chilly morning, I set off on the bicycle, pedaling hard in order to be on time. Cycling, I have found, allows one to think without fear of one's facial expressions being observed. It was a relief, yet hardly a comfort, to think about recent events as I sped through Kindford and turned onto the Chaucerley Way. I wondered what in the world had happened to my mother. Trying not to dwell on that, I wondered whether I would have difficulty finding the railway station and my brothers. I wondered why on earth Mum had named my brothers Mycroft and Sherlock. Backwards their names spelled Forcum and Colress. I wondered whether Mum was all right. I think instead about Mycroft and Sherlock. I wondered whether or not I would recognize them at the train station. I had not seen them since I was 4 years old, at Father's funeral. All I remember of them was that they had seemed very tall in their top hats, draped in black crepe, and severe in their black frock coats, their black gloves, their black armbands, their gleaming black patent leather boots. I wondered whether Father had really expired of mortification due to my existence, as the village children liked to tell me, or whether he had succumbed to fever and pleurisy, as Mum said. I wondered whether my brothers would recognize me after 10 years. Why they had not visited Mother and me, and why we had not visited them, of course I knew, because of the disgrace I had brought upon my family by being born. My brothers could ill afford to associate with us. Mycroft was a busy, influential man with a career in government service in London, and my brother Sherlock was a famous detective with a book written about him, A Study in Scarlet, by his friend and fellow lodger, Dr. John Watson. Mum had bought a copy. Don't think about Mum. And we had both read it. Ever since I had been dreaming of London, the great seaport, the seat of monarchy, the hub of high society, yet according to Dr. Watson, that great cesspool into which all the loungers and idlers of the empire are irresistibly drained. London, where men in white ties and the women decked with diamonds attended the opera, while in the streets heartless cabbies drove horses to exhaustion, according to another favorite book of mine, Black Beauty. London, where scholars read in the British Museum and crowds thronged the theatres to be mesmerized. London, where famous people held seances to communicate with the spirits of the dead, while other famous people tried to scientifically explain how a spiritualist had levitated himself out of a window and into a waiting carriage. London, where penniless boys wore rags and ran wild in the streets, never going to school. London, where villains killed ladies of the night. I had no clear idea what these were, and took their babies in order to sell them into slavery. In London there were royalty and cutthroats. In London there were master musicians, master artists, and master criminals who kidnapped children and forced them to labor in dens of iniquity. I had no clear idea what those were either, but I knew that my brother Sherlock, sometimes employed by royalty, ventured into the dens of iniquity to match wits against thugs, thieves, and the princes of crime. My brother Sherlock was a hero. I remember Dr. Watson listing my brother's accomplishments: scholar, chemist, superb violinist, expert marksman, swordsman, single-stick fighter, pugilist, and brilliant deductive thinker. Then I formed a mental list of my own accomplishments: able to read, write, and do sums, find birds' nests, dig worms, and catch fish, and, oh yes, ride a bicycle. The comparison being so dismal, I stopped thinking to devote my attention to the road as I had reached the edge of Chaucerley. The crowd in the cobbled streets daunted me somewhat. I had to wind my way among persons and vehicles unknown of the dirt lanes of Kindford, men selling fruit from barrows, women with baskets peddling sweets, nannies pushing prams, too many pedestrians trying not to be run over by too many carts, coaches and gigs, beer wagons and coal wagons and lumber wagons, a carriage, even an omnibus pulled by no less than 4 horses. Amid all this, how was I to find the railway station? Wait, I saw something. Rising over the housetops like an ostrich feather upon a lady's hat stood a white plume in the grey sky, the smoke of a steam locomotive. Pedaling towards it, I soon heard roaring, shrieking, clanging noise, the engine coming in. I arrived at the platform just as it did. Only a few passengers got off, and among them I had no difficulty recognizing 2 tall male Londoners who had to be my brothers. They wore gentlemen's country attire, dark tweed suits with a braid edging, soft ties, bowler hats, and kid gloves. Only gentry wore gloves in the height of summer. One of my brothers had grown a bit stout, showing an expanse of a silk waistcoat. That would be Mycroft, I suppose, the older by 7 years. The other, Sherlock, stood straight as a rake and lean as a greyhound in his charcoal suit and black boots. Swinging their walking sticks, they turned their heads from side to side, looking for something, but their scrutiny passed right over me. Meanwhile, everyone on the platform stole glances at them, and to my annoyance I found myself trembling as I hopped off my bicycle. A strip of lace from my pantalettes, confounded flimsy things, caught on the chain, tore loose and dangled over my left boot. Trying to tuck it up, I dropped my shawl. This would not do. Taking a deep breath, leaving my shawl on my bicycle and my bicycle leaning against the station wall, I straightened and approached the 2 Londoners, not quite succeeding in holding my head high. "Mr. Holmes?" I asked. And, Mr. Holmes?" 2 pairs of sharp grey eyes fixed upon me. 2 pairs of aristocratic brows lifted. I said, You asked me to meet you here?" "Enola!" they both exclaimed at once, and then in rapid alternation, "What are you doing here? Why did you not send the carriage? We should have known her. She looks just like you, Sherlock." The taller, leaner one was indeed Sherlock then. I liked his bony face, his hawk eyes, his nose like a beak, but I sensed that for me to look like him was no compliment. "I thought she was a street urchin." "On a bicycle? Why the bicycle? Where's the carriage, Enola?" I blinked. Carriage? There were a landau and a phaeton, guess it's phaeton, gathering dust in the carriage house, but there had been no horses for many years, not since my mother's old hunter had gone on to the greener pastures. "I could have hired horses, I suppose," I said slowly, "but I would not know how to harness or drive them." The stout one, Mycroft, exclaimed, "Why are we paying a stable boy then, and a groom?" "I beg your pardon? Are you telling me there are no horses?" "Later, Mycroft. You!" With commanding ease, Sherlock summoned a loitering lad. "Go hire us a brougham." Brougham. I don't know, it's probably a carriage. He tossed a coin to the boy, who touched his cap and ran off. "We had better wait inside," Mycroft said. "Out here in the wind, Enola's hair more and more resembles a jackdaw's nest. Where's your hat, Enola?" By then, somehow, the moment had passed for me to say, "How do you do?" or for them to say, "So nice to see you again, my dear," and shake hands or something of that sort, even though I was the shame of the family. By then, also, I was beginning to realize that "Please meet at station" had been a request for transportation, not for me to present myself in person. Well, if they did not desire the pleasure of my conversation, it was a good thing, as I stood mute and stupid. "Or your gloves," Sherlock chided, taking me by the arm and steering me towards the station. "Or decent decorous clothing of any sort. You're a young lady now, Enola." That statement alarmed me into speech. "I've only just turned 14. In puzzled, almost plaintive tones, Mycroft murmured, "But I've been paying for the seamstress." Speaking to me, Sherlock decreed in that offhand imperial way of his, "You should have been in long skirts since you were 12. Whatever was your mother thinking of? I suppose she's gone over entirely to the suffragists?" I don't know where she's gone, I said, and to my own surprise, for I had not wept until that moment, I burst into tears. Hi, Rady, welcome. Further mention of Mum, then, was put off until we sat in the hired brougham, with my bicycle strapped on behind, swaying along towards Kindford. We are a pair of thoughtless brutes, Sherlock had observed to Mycroft at one point, while providing me with a large, very starchy handkerchief, hardly comforting to the nose. I am sure they thought I was weeping for my mum, and I was, but truthfully I wept also for myself. Enola, alone. Shoulder to shoulder on the seat opposite me, my brothers sat together, facing me, yet looking at anything else. Plainly they found me an embarrassment. I quieted my sniffling within a few minutes of leaving the railway station, but I could not think of anything to say. A brougham, being little more than a wheeled box with small windows, does not encourage conversation, even if I were inclined to point out the beauties of nature, which I most definitely was not. So, Enola, asked Mycroft gruffly after a while, are you feeling well enough to tell us what has happened? I did so, but there was little to add to what they already knew. Mum had left home early on Tuesday morning and had not returned since. No, she had left me no message or explanation of any sort. No, there was no reason to think she might have taken ill. Her health was excellent. No, there had been no word of her from anyone. No, in answer to Sherlock's questions, there had been no bloodstains, no footprints, no signs of forced entry, and I did not know of any strangers who had been lurking about. No, there had been no ransom demand. If Mum had any enemies, I did not know of them. Yes, I had notified the Kindford Police Constabulary. So I can see, Sherlock remarked, leaning forward to peer out the window as we rolled into Ferndale Park. For there they are, along with every loiterer in the village, prodding the bushes and peering about in the most ineffectual manner. Did they expect to find her sheltering under a hawthorn? Grunting as his frontal amplitude got in his way, Mycroft leaned forward to look in his turn. His bushy eyebrows shot up under the brim of his hat. What? He cried. Nothing has been done to the grounds? Startled, I protested. Nothing? Absolutely nothing has been done, apparently, for years. All is sorely overgrown. Interesting, Sherlock murmured. Barbaric, Mycroft retorted. Grass a foot tall, saplings springing up, gorse, bramble bushes. Those are wild roses. I liked them. Growing on what should be the front lawn? How, pray tell, does the gardener earn his pay? Gardener? There is no gardener. Mycroft turned on me like a hawk stooping. But you do have a gardener. Ruggles, the man's name is, and I've been paying him 12 shillings a week for the past 10 years. I dare say I sat with my mouth open for several reasons. How could Mycroft be suffering under this absurd delusion that there was a gardener? I knew no one named Ruggles. Moreover, I had no idea that money came from Mycroft. I think I'd been assuming that money like stair rails and chandeliers and other furnishings came with the hall. Sherlock intervened. Mycroft, if there were such a personage, I am sure Enola would be well aware of him. Bah! She wasn't aware of... Sherlock interrupted, although addressing his remark to me. Enola, never mind. Mycroft gets quite out of humor when he is disrupted from his usual orbit between his rooms, his office, and the I cannot read that. They split the word in half. I guess it's Diogenes Club. Diogenes Club. Ignoring him, his brother leaned toward me, demanding, Enola, are there really no horses, no groom, and no stable boy? No, I mean, yes. Yes, there really were none. Well, which is it? No or yes? Mycroft, Sherlock intervened. The girl's head, you'll observe, is rather small in proportion to her remarkably tall body. Let her alone. There is no use in confusing and upsetting her when you'll find out for yourself soon enough. Indeed, at that moment, the hired carriage pulled up in front of Ferndale Hall. It's the end of the 3rd chapter. Whew, catching up. The okay hand is your thing, Tori. But in Adventure Time, there's an episode where like Jake and Finn are talking about like being high class or something, and they do this. And that's like what that means in the episode. Thanks for hosting, Riddy. Oh, don't worry about being late. You've probably already heard all these chapters anyways. Yes, where Basil Baker Street does his thing. That's such a great movie. Man, we should rabbit that movie. Add it to the list. That would be really cool. I would like to see Kingdom Hearts do The Great Mouse Detective. Ruggles, yeah. It's spelled just like that. Ruggles. Oh my gosh, Tori. I feel like I should try and pronounce as much of this book as possible, and I feel like I'm doing it a terrible injustice because this all takes place in England, and I am not British, and so I apologize to any members of England or the UK or Europe or Ireland, because you guys don't call yourself the UK. Any of you Europeans that know how to pronounce all these words and are just screaming in frustration that I'm not pronouncing them correctly. So, I just want to take a moment and get that out of the way. So, there you go. You are classy, but that's not exactly what I was saying. No, I am not British. Sorry. I'm American. I am American. Southern American, too. So. I know. It's a shock to the system. Alrighty. 2 more chapters to go. And then we'll end stream and progress. Alright. Don't be too shocked, Rudy. It's okay. It's okay. I'm going to turn my fan off, though, because I'm getting a little chilly. Just flip the switch. All those years of being her best friend, and she just drops the bomb about her not being British. I know. So tragic. I know. I'm sorry, I'm a disappointment. I have so many secrets, just so many secrets. Alright. Chapter the 4th. Entering my mother's rooms along with my brothers, I noticed upon the tea table a Japanese vase with flowers in it, their petals going brown. Mum must have arranged that bouquet a day or two before she had gone missing. I picked up the vase and hugged it to my chest. Sherlock Holmes swept past me. He had rebuffed Lane's welcome, declined Mrs. Lane's offer of a cup of tea, refused to pause even a moment before beginning his investigation. Glancing about my mother's light, airy sitting room with its many watercolors of flowers, he strode through the studio and onward into the bedchamber. There I heard him give a sharp exclamation. "What is it?" called Mycroft, ambling in more slowly, having chatted a moment with Lane as he left his stick, hat, and gloves in the butler's care. "Deplorable!" cried Sherlock from the far room, referring, I assume, to the mess in general, and the unmentionables in particular. "Indecent!" Yes, definitely the unmentionables. Striding out of the bedroom, he reappeared in the studio. She seems to have left in a great haste. Seems, I thought. Or perhaps she has become lax in her personal habits, he added more calmly. She is, after all, 64 years old. The vase of flowers in my arms gave off an odor of stagnant water and decaying stems. When it was fresh, however, the bouquet must have smelled wonderful. The shriveled blossoms I saw had been sweet peas and thistles. Sweet peas and thistles, I exclaimed. How odd. Both men turned their eyes upon me with some exasperation. Your mother was odd, said Sherlock curtly. And still is, presumably, added Mycroft more gently for my benefit, judging by the warning glance he gave his brother. So they too feared she might be deceased. In the same sharp tone, Sherlock said, From the state of affairs here, it appears she may now have progressed from oddness to senile dementia. Hero or no hero, his manner, was beginning to annoy me, and distress me, for my mother was his mother too. How could he be so cold? I did not know then, had no way of knowing, that Sherlock Holmes lived his life in a kind of chill shadow. He suffered from melancholy, the fits sometimes coming upon him so badly that for a week or more he would refuse to rise from his bed. Senility? Mycroft asked. Can you not arrive at any more helpful deduction? Such as? You're the detective. Whip up that lens of yours. Detect! I have already done so. There is nothing to be learned here. Outside, then. After a full day of rain, there will be no traces to tell which way she's gone, foolish woman. Dismayed by his tone and this comment, I left, carrying the vase of withering flowers downstairs to the kitchen. There I found Mrs. Lane crouched upon the floor with a scrub brush, scouring the oak board so fiercely that I suspected she, also, was perturbed in her mind. I dumped the contents of the Japanese vase into the wooden slop bucket, on top of vegetable parings and such. On her hands and knees, Mrs. Lane told the floor, "Here I was so looking forward to seeing Mr. Mycroft and Mr. Sherlock again." Setting the green slime vase in the lead-lined wooden sink, I ran water into it from the cistern tap. Mrs. Lane spoke on. "And here it's still the same old story, the same foolish quarrel, they've never a kind word for their own mother, and she may be lying out there." Her voice actually broke. I said nothing, so as not to further upset her. Sniffing and scrubbing, Mrs. Lane declared, "Small wonder their bachelors must have everything their way, think it's their right, never could abide a strong-minded woman." A bell rang, one of a number of bells poised on coiled wires along the wall above the stove. "There now, that's the morning-room bell. I suppose that's them wanting luncheon, and me up to my elbows in the dirt on this floor." Having had no breakfast, I quite wanted luncheon myself. Also, I wanted to know what was going on. I left the kitchen and went to the morning-room. At that informal room's small table sat Sherlock, smoking a pipe and staring at Mycroft, who sat across from him. "The two best thinkers in England ought to be able to reason this out," Mycroft was saying. "Now, has Mother gone off voluntarily, or was she planning to return? The untidy state of her room, could that mean she simply left impulsively and in haste? Or could it reflect the innate untidiness of a woman's mind?" interrupted Sherlock. "Of what use is reason when it comes to the dealings of a woman, and very likely one in her dotage?" Both of them glanced up at me as I entered the room, appearing hopeful that I might be a housemaid, although they should have known by now that there were none. "Luncheon?" Mycroft asked. "Heaven knows," I replied as I sat down at the table with them. "Mrs. Lane is in an uncertain frame of mind." Indeed. I studied my tall, handsome, to me at least, brilliant brothers. I admired them. I wanted to like them. I wanted them to— "Nonsense, Enola, you'll do very well on your own." As for my brothers, they paid me no further heed. "I assure you, Mother is neither in her dotage nor demented," said Mycroft to Sherlock. "No senile woman could have compiled the account she has sent me over the past 10 years, perfectly clear and orderly, detailing the expense of installing a bathroom—" "Which does not exist," interrupted Sherlock in acid tones. "And the water closet?" "Likewise." "And the constantly rising salaries of the footmen, the housemaids, the kitchen maid, and the daily help?" "Non-existent." "The gardener, the under-gardener, the odd man?" "Also non-existent, unless one considers Dick." "Who is quite odd," Mycroft agreed. A joke, yet I saw no flicker of a smile on either of my brothers. "I'm surprised Mother did not list one Reginald Colley, who is arguably a servant, in her expenses. She listed imaginary horses and ponies, imaginary carriages, a coachman, grooms, stable-boys." There is no denying that we have been woefully deceived. "And for Enola, a music teacher, a dancing instructor, a governess—" A startled look passed between them as if a logic problem had suddenly grown a face and hair, and then both at once they turned to stare at me. "Enola," Sherlock demanded, "you have at least had a governess, haven't you?" I had not. Mum had sent me to school with the village children, and after I had learned all I could there, she had told me I would do quite well on my own, and I considered that I had. I'd read every book in Ferndale Hall's library, from A Child's Garden of Verses to the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. As I hesitated, Mycroft restated the question. "You have had the proper education of a young lady?" "I've read Shakespeare," I replied, "and Aristotle and Locke and the novels of Thackeray and the essays of Mary Wollstonecraft." Their faces froze. I could scarcely have horrified them more if I had told them I had learned to perform on a circus trapeze. Then Sherlock turned to Mycroft and said softly, "It's my fault. There's no trusting a woman. Why make an exception for one's mother? I should have come here to check on her yearly, at the very least, no matter how much unpleasantness would have ensued." Excuse me. Mycroft said just as softly and sadly, "To the contrary, my dear Sherlock, it is I who have neglected my responsibility. I am the elder son." A discreet cough sounded, and in came Lane with a tray of cucumber sandwiches, sliced fruit, and a pitcher of lemonade. There was blessed silence for a few moments until luncheon was served. During that silence, I framed a question. What has any of this, I asked after Lane had withdrawn, what has any of this to do with finding Mother? Rather than answering me, Mycroft gave his full attention to his plate. Sherlock drummed his fingers, rumpling the starch-laced tablecloth. We are formulating a theory, he said at last. And what is that theory? Silence again. I asked, am I to have my mother back again or not? Neither of them would look at me, but after what seemed a long time, Sherlock glanced at his brother and said, Mycroft, I think she has a right to know. Mycroft sighed, nodded, and put down what remained of his third sandwich and faced me. We are trying to decide, he said, whether what is happening now connects to what happened after our father's passing away. You wouldn't remember, I suppose. I was 4 years old, I said. I remember mostly the black horses. Quite so. Well, after the burial, over the next few days, there was a disagreement. That's putting it kindly, Sherlock interposed. The words battle royale come to mind. Ignoring him, Mycroft went on. Disagreement as to the handling of the estate. Neither Sherlock nor I wanted to live here, so Mother thought that the rent money should come directly to her, and that she should run Ferndale Park. Well, she did run it, didn't she? Yet Mycroft sounded as if he considered the idea absurd. As I am the firstborn son, the estate is mine, he went on, and Mother did not dispute that, but she could not see why she could not manage things for me, rather than the other way around. When Sherlock and I reminded her that, legally, she had no right to even live here unless I permitted it, she became quite irrational and made it clear that we were no longer welcome in our own birthplace. Oh, my goodness. Everything seemed to turn upside down in my mind as if it were swinging by its knees from a tree limb. All my life I had assumed that my brothers kept their distance due to my shameful existence, whereas they were saying a quarrel with my mother? I could not tell how Mycroft felt regarding this revelation, or Sherlock. I could not quite tell how I felt about it either, other than bewildered, but something secret fluttered like a butterfly in my heart. I sent her a monthly allowance, Mycroft went on, and she wrote me a very businesslike letter requesting an increase. I replied by asking for an accounting of how the money was being spent, and she complied. Her continuing requests for additional funds seemed so reasonable that I never refused any of them. But as we now know, her accounts were fictitious. What actually has become of all of that money, we have no idea. I noticed this hesitation. But you have a theory, I said. Yes. He took a long breath. We think she has been hoarding while planning an escape all this time. While planning an escapade all this time. Another breath, even longer. We think she has now taken what she perceives as her money and, gone somewhere to, thumb her nose at us, so to speak. What on earth was he saying? That Mum abandoned me? I sat with my mouth ajar. Pity the girl's cranial capacity, Mycroft, Sherlock murmured to his brother, and to me he said gently, Enola, simply put, we think she has run away. But that was preposterous! Impossible! She wouldn't have done that to me! No, I blurted. No, it can't be. Think, Enola. Sherlock sounded just like Mum. All logic points to that conclusion. If she were injured, the searchers would have found her, and if she were in an accident, we would have heard. There is no reason for anyone to harm her, and there are no signs of foul play. There was no reason for anyone to seize her against her will, other than ransom, for which there has been no demand. He paused for a significant breath before going on. If, however, she is alive, in good health, and doing whatever she pleases, as usual, Mycroft put in, her disorderly bedroom could be the merest blind. To throw us off track, Mycroft agreed. It certainly appears that she has been plotting and scheming for years. I sat up straight like a steam whistle. But if she could have left any time, I wailed, why would she do it on my birthday? Now it was their turn to sit with mouths slack and uncouth. I had bested them. But at that very triumphant instant it had occurred to me with a chill that Mum had instructed Mrs. Lane to give me my gifts, just in case she were not back in time for tea. Or forever. It's the end of chapter 4. I'm gonna scroll back up and catch up. Holy crap, what are you guys talking about? Oh, there we go. Okay, I found it. Chapter the 4th be with you. Exactly. That's good, Tara. I've tried telling Nancy True to detect while I'm playing, but she just says, This needs something. Haven't done that yet. Still have to do that. Check. Check. Ugh. Nancy. I actually have some ice cream in the fridge. Or sorry, it's in the freezer. It'd be kind of messy in the fridge. Please eat, you guys. But don't eat Ritty. Just eat. I like Enola too. She's pretty great. Alrighty. I know. That's the beauty of a book, though. It's like, it's its own little world, and so you open it, and you bring it into your world, and then your worlds collide, and it's just wonderful magic that can only be accomplished in reading. Read books, kids. Alright. Chapter the 5th. We're gonna read, okay, here's the game plan. We're gonna read this chapter, and then I'm gonna stop stream. I'm actually gonna stop it and go offline. I'm gonna change a few things on my settings, and then I'm gonna start it back up, and I'm gonna start the next book. So, all of you YouTube viewers right now that are really confused, you like one person that's probably watching this on YouTube, you keep going, finish the rest of this book, and then go back after you finish it. You can start watching book 2. But for all my Twitch people that are watching right now, you probably have already heard the rest of this book, so we're just going to keep going into book 2. This was just a catch-up stream for all you YouTube viewers out there. So, okay, go grab a snack. I'm gonna press on, because you've already heard this, so. Alright, chapter the 5th. Because my eyes burned with tears, I am afraid I excused myself from luncheon rather hastily. I needed to be outside. Fresh air would cool my heated feelings. Pausing only to snatch up the new drawing kit Mum had given me, I ran out the kitchen door, through the vegetable garden, past the empty stables, across the overgrown lawn, and into the wooden portion of the estate. Then, out of breath, I walked on beneath the oaks, feeling somewhat better. It seemed I was alone in the forest. The constables and other searchers had passed on to the more distant fields and moorlands. The woodland sloped downward at the bottom of that incline, and at the bottom of that incline I reached my favorite place. The deep rocky dell where ferns draped like a lady's green velvet evening gown over the stones, trailing down to a pebbly stream that formed a pool under the leaning willow. Heedless of my frock and pantalettes, I clambered over the rocks and ferns until I reached the willow. Hugging its stout trunk, I laid my cheek against its mossy bark. Then I ducked beneath it to crawl into a shady hollow beneath the overhanging tree and the stream. This cool nook was my secret hideaway, known to no one except me. Here I kept things I liked, things Mrs. Lane would have thrown out if I had brought them into the house. As my eyes grew accustomed to the shadows, I settled into my earthly den, looking around me at the little shelves I had built out of stones. Yes, there were my snail shells, my many-colored pebbles, my acorn caps, some bright jay feathers, a cufflink and a broken locket, and other such treasures I had found in magpies' nests. With a sigh of relief, I curled my knees up to my chin in a most unladylike fashion, wrapped my arms around my shins, and gazed at the eddying water just beyond my feet. Trout fingerlings swam in the pool. Watching them dart and school, usually I could mesmerize myself into a sort of daze. But not today. All I could think was what could have become of Mum, how I would have to go home eventually, and she would not be awaiting me, but my brothers would, and when I entered with a great deal of dirt all over my frock, they would say, "A pox on my brothers." Putting my knees down where they belonged, I opened my new drawing kit to take pencil in hand and a few sheets of paper. On one of these I drew a hasty, not particularly nice picture of Mycroft, in his spats and his monocle, and his heavy pocket-watch chain looped across his protruding waistcoat. Then I drew a similarly quick picture of Sherlock, all lanky legs and nose and chin. Then I wanted to draw Mum, for I was angry at her too. I wanted to sketch her as she might have looked the day she went away, in her hat like an upside-down flower pot, turkey-back jacket, and a bustle so ridiculous. And she hadn't taken her art kit with her. And she hadn't expected to be back for my birthday celebration. She had been up to something. Much as it hurt, I admitted it now. Confound her. The whole time I'd been searching for her in a panic, she'd been doing very well on her own, enjoying some adventure without me. One would think I might feel glad to conclude that she was alive. Quite the contrary, I felt wretched. She had abandoned me. Why hadn't she just cast me off in the first place, put me in a basket and left me on a doorstep when I was born? Why had she left me now? Where might she have gone? Instead of sketching, I sat thinking. Laying aside my drawings, I wrote a list of questions. Why did Mum not take me with her? If she had any distance to travel, why did she not use the bicycle? Why did she dress so oddly? Why did she not leave by the gate? If she struck out across country on foot, where was she going? Supposing she found transportation again, where was she going? What did she do with all the money? If she were running away, why did she carry no baggage? Why would she run away on my birthday? Why would she leave me no word of explanation or farewell? Putting down my pencil, I stared at the eddying stream, the fingerlings flowing past like dark tears. Something rustled in the underbrush that flanked the willow. As I turned to look, a familiar furry head poked into my hollow. "Oh, Reginald," I complained, "let me alone." But I leaned toward the old collie. He thrust his broad, blunt snout at my face, fanning his tail as I put my arms around his shaggy neck. "Thank you, Reginald," said a cultured voice. My brother Sherlock stood over me. Gasping, I pushed Reginald away and reached for the papers I had left lying on the ground, but not quickly enough. Sherlock picked them up first. He gawked at my drawings of Mycroft and himself, then threw his head back and laughed, almost silently, yet quite heartily, rocking back and forth until he had to sit down on a shelf of rock beside the willow tree, gasping for breath. I felt on fire with mortification, but he was smiling. "Well done, Enola," he chuckled when he could speak. "You have quite the knack for caricature." He gave the sketches back to me. It would perhaps be best if Mycroft were not to see those. Keeping my red face down, I slipped the papers into the bottom of the drawing kit. My brother said, "Sometime that tree is going to tumble right into the water, you know, and it is to be hoped that you will not be underneath it when that happens." He was not mocking my hideaway, at least, but I felt mild reproach in his words, and his desire for me to come out. Frowning, I did so. He asked, "What is that paper you have in your hand? May I see?" "My list." I gave it to him, telling myself I didn't care any more what he thought of me. I sat slumping on another fern-upholstered rock as he read. He paid close attention to my list. Indeed, he pondered it, his narrow, hawk-nosed face quite serious now. "You have certainly covered all the salient points," he said, finally, with some small air of surprise. "I think we can surmise that she did not leave by the gate because she did not want the lodge-keeper to see in what direction she was going, and for the same reason she did not want to use the roads where she might meet with some witness. She has been clever enough to leave us with no idea whether she went north, south, east, or west." I nodded, sitting up straighter, feeling unaccountably better. My brother Sherlock had not laughed at my thoughts. He was talking with me. That nameless butterfly fluttering in my heart, I began to sense now what it was. It had started when I found out that my brother's quarrel was with my mother, not with me. It was a hope, a dream, a yearning, really, now that there might be a chance. I wanted my brothers to... I did not dare to think in terms of affection, but I wanted them to care for me a little, somehow. Sherlock was saying, "As for your other points, Enola, I hope to clear them up very soon." I nodded again. "One question I do not understand. While I asked Lane for a description of your mother's attire, I failed to see how it was odd." I blushed, remembering my shocking blunder with Lane, and only just managed to murmur, The tourneur. Ah, the bustle. It was perfectly all right for him to say it. As the cannibal asked the missionary's wife, "Are all your women so deformed?" Well, there is no accounting for the ways ladies choose to adorn themselves. The whims of the fair sex defy logic. He shrugged, dismissing the subject. "Enola, I am returning to London within the hour, therefore I searched you out in order to say goodbye to you and to tell you that it has been delightful to see you again after all these years." He offered his hand, gloved, of course. I grasped it for a moment. I could not speak. "Mycroft will remain here for a few days," Sherlock went on, "as he cares to be away from his... little as he cares to be away from his dear... Diogenes Club? I'll spell it. Here's how it's spelled. That's how it's spelled. So, you make what you will, how that's supposed to be pronounced. After swallowing to regain my voice, I asked, "What will you do in London?" "File an inquiry with Scotland Yard, search the passenger lists of steamship companies for women traveling alone, in case, as we hypothesize, our straying mother has left England for the south of France or some such artistic Mecca, or perhaps she is making a pilgrimage to some shrine of the suffragettes." He looked at me quite levelly. "Enola, you have known her more recently than I. Where do you think she might have gone?" The great Sherlock Holmes asking me for my thoughts? But I had none to offer. I was, after all, a girl of minimal cranial capacity. Feeling the heat of my blush once more start to burn its way up my neck, I shook my head. "Well, the constabulary report's not a sign of her hereabouts, so I am off." He stood up, touching the brim of his hat as a courtesy, not quite tipping it to me. "Take heart," he told me. "There is no indication that she has come to any harm." Then, swinging his stick, he walked up the rocks of the dell with easy dignity, as if ascending a marble stairway to some London palace. Reaching the top without turning, he raised his cane, waggling it in a kind of dismissal or farewell, then strode off towards the hall with the dog trotting adoringly after him. I watched him until he disappeared between the forest trees, watched after him almost as if I knew that, through no fault of his own, I would not converse with him again for a long time. Back at the hall, I went looking for the item Lane had called a dress improver, finding it where I had left it, most inappropriately, in the front parlor. I wondered why Mom had put the featherweight cushion upon her dresser, yet had not worn it inside her bustle. Pondering, I took it and walked upstairs to replace it in her bedroom in case she wanted it when she returned. But there was no reason to think she would ever return. She had, after all, chosen to leave of her own free will. Sinking into the hard wooden arms of a hallway chair, I slumped like a comma over the prickly poof of horsehair I held. I stayed that way for a long time. Finally, I lifted my head, vengeful thoughts hardening my jaw. If Mum had left me behind, I was very well going to help myself to the contents of her rooms. This was a decision prompted partly by spleen, partly by necessity. Having ruined my frock, I needed to change it. The few others I owned, formerly white, now yellow-green with dirt and grass stains, only looked worse. I would choose something out of Mum's wardrobe. Rising, I strode the upstairs hallway to my mother's door and turned the knob. To no good effect. The door was locked. It had been a most annoying day. Stalking to the stairs, leaning over the banister, I allowed my voice to rise to a naughty pitch. "Lane!" "Shh!" Amazingly, for he could have been anywhere from the chimney to the cellar, the butler appeared below me within a moment. One white-gloved finger to his lips, he informed me, "Miss Enola, Mr. Mycroft is napping." Rolling my eyes, I beckoned Lane to come upstairs. When he had done so, I told him more quietly, "I need the key to Mother's rooms. Mr. Mycroft has given orders that those rooms are to be kept locked." Astonishment trumped my annoyance. "Whatever for?" "It's not my place to ask, Miss Enola." "Very well, I don't need the key if you'll just unlock the door for me." "I should have to ask Mr. Mycroft's permission, Miss Enola, and if I awaken him, he will be put out. Mr. Mycroft have given orders." "Mr. Mycroft this, Mr. Mycroft that. Mr. Mycroft could go soak his head in a rain barrel." Tight-lipped, I thrust the dress improver at Lane. "I need to put this back where it belongs." The butler actually blushed, which gratified me, as I had not seen him ever do so before. "Moreover," I continued quite softly between my clenched teeth, "I need to search my mother's wardrobe for something to wear. If I go down to dinner in this frock, Mr. Mycroft will be more than put out. He will be froth at the mouth. Unlock the door." Without another word, Lane did so, but he himself kept the key and stood outside the door waiting for me. Therefore, filled with the spirit of perversity, I took my time, but as I scanned my mother's dresses, I thought also about this new development. Locked door to Mum's rooms, entry with Mycroft's permission only. This would never do. I wondered whether Mum might possibly have left her own key behind. The thought frightened me, for if, dressing to go out for the day, if she had intended to return, she would have taken the key with her. Therefore, if she had left it behind, the meaning was all too plain. It took me a moment and several deep breaths to make myself reach for her walking suit, which still hung over the standing mirror. I found the key at once in a jacket pocket. It felt heavy in my hand. I stood looking at it as if I had never seen it before. Oval handle on one end of the shank, toothed rectangle on the other. Strange, cold iron thing. Yet she wasn't planning to come back, then. Yet this hateful skeleton of metal had suddenly become my most precious possession. Clutching it, I draped a dress from my mother's wardrobe over my hand to conceal it, and went out again. "Very well, Lane," I told him blandly, and he once more locked the door. At dinner, Mycroft had the courtesy not to say a word about my borrowed dress, a loose, flowing, aesthetic gown, which bared my neck but hung upon the rest of me like a sheet upon a broomstick. Although I was as tall as Mum, I lacked her womanly figure, and in any event I had chosen the dress for its color, peach touched with cream, which I loved, not for any pretense of fit. It dragged on the floor, but very well, thus it concealed my little girl boots. I had tied a sash around my straightest poker middle to resemble a waist. I wore a necklace. I had even tried to arrange my hair, although its indefinite brownish hue made it hardly a crowning beauty. Altogether, I am sure I looked like a child playing dress-up, and I knew it. Mycroft, although he said nothing, clearly was not pleased. As soon as the fish was served, he told me, "I have sent to London for a seamstress to provide you with proper clothing." I nodded. Some new clothes would be nice, and if I didn't like them, I could revert to my comfortable knickerbockers. I could revert to my comfortable knickerbockers the moment his back was turned. But I said, "There is a seamstress right here in Kindford." "Yes, I am aware of that, but the London seamstress will know exactly what you need for boarding school." Whatever was he talking about? Quite patiently I said, "I am not going to boarding school." Just as patiently he responded, "Of course you are, Enola. I have sent inquiries to several excellent establishments for young ladies." Mother had told me about such establishments. Her rational dress journals were filled with warnings about their cultivation of the hourglass figure. At one such school, the headmistress tightened a corset upon each girl who entered it, and on the girl's waist the corset stayed day and night, waking or sleeping except for 1 hour a week, when it was removed for ablutions, that is, so that the girl could bathe. Then it was replaced tighter, depriving the wearer of the ability to breathe normally so that the slightest shock would cause her to fall down in a faint. This was considered charming. It was also considered moral, the corset being an ever-present monitor bidding its wearer to exercise self-restraint. In other words, making it impossible for the hapless victim to bend or relax her posture. The modern corsets, unlike my mother's old whalebone ones, were so long they needed to be made of steel so as not to break, their rigidity displacing the internal organs and deforming the rib cage. One schoolgirl's corseted ribs had actually punctured her lungs, causing her untimely demise. Her waist as she lay in her coffin had measured 15 inches. All of this passed through my mind in an instant as my fork dropped to my plate with a clatter. I sat stunned, chilled by the horror of my situation, yet unable to state any of my objections to my brother. To speak of such intimate matters of the female form to a male was unthinkable. I was only to gasp, But mother, there is no assurance that your mother will come back any time soon. I cannot stay here indefinitely." Thank goodness, I thought. "And you can't just vegetate here by yourself now, can you, Enola? Are Lane and Mrs. Lane not to stay on?" He frowned, putting down the knife with which he had been buttering his bread. "Of course, but servants cannot possibly provide you with a proper instruction and supervision." I was about to say, "Mother would not like—" "Your mother has failed in her responsibility to you." His tone had grown considerably sharper than the butter knife. "What is to become of you if you do not acquire some accomplishments, some social graces, some finish? You will never be able to move into polite society, and your prospects of matrimony are dim to nil in any event," I said, as I looked just like Sherlock. I think my candor staggered him. "My dear girl," his tone softened, "that will change, or it will be changed." By my sitting for endless hours with a book on top of my head while playing the piano, I supposed. Days spent in torment, plus corsets, dress improvers, and false hair, although he would not say so. "You come from a family of quality, and with some polishing I am sure you will not disgrace us." I said, "I have always been a disgrace. I will always be a disgrace, and I am not going to be sent to any finishing establishment for young ladies." "Yes, you are." Glaring at the table across each other in the candlelit twilight, we had given up any pretense of dining. I am sure he was aware, as I was, that both Lane and Mrs. Lane were eavesdropping in the hallway, but I, for one, did not care. I raised my voice. "No! Get me a governess if you must, but I am not going to any so-called boarding school. You cannot make me go." He actually softened his tone, but said, "Yes, I can, and I shall." "What do you mean? Shall you shackle me to take me there?" He rolled his eyes. "Just like her mother," he declared to the ceiling, and then fixed his eyes upon me, a stare so martyred, so condescending that I froze rigid. In tones of sweetest reason he told me, "Enola, legally I hold complete charge over both your mother and you. I can, if I wish, lock you in your room until you become sensible, or take whatever other measures are necessary in order to achieve that desired result. Moreover, as your older brother, I bear a moral responsibility for you, and it is plain to see that you have run wild too long. I am perhaps only just in time to save you from a wasted life. You will do as I say." In that moment, I understood exactly how Mum had felt during those days after my father's death, and why she had made no attempt to visit my brothers in London or welcome them into Ferndale Park, and why she had tricked money out of Mycroft. I stood up. Dinner no longer appeals to me. You'll excuse me, I'm sure. I wish I could say I swept with cold dignity out of the room, but the truth is, I tripped over my skirt and stumbled to the stairs. That's the end of the 5th chapter. Challenge accepted. Oh, hey, Semi! Welcome! I'm gonna catch up on all this stuff. All your chat. Your chatty chat. I'm just kind of skimming. Ooh. Good lord, that sounds really good. Blackberries, honey, and whipped cream. Sounds delicious. Burritos are good. Diogenes? Is that how you say it, Riddy? Did you look it up? Diogenes Club? See, I thought it was Diogenes, but Diogenes Club? I think. Yeah, I think there was a philosopher with that name. Detect! Yay! First half of the stream! Hi! I'm doing well. I am doing very well. This is, so I finished chapter 5, which concludes the streaming of book 1. So here's what's gonna happen. I'm only gonna be gone just a couple minutes while I get the rest of the stuff set up for the next book. If you have not heard or listened to or read the rest of this book, The Case of the Missing Marquess, you will be able to find that on my YouTube channel. I don't have a link, but the username is just my username. So I'm going to post all that on YouTube, and you can catch up on this book, and then in a couple minutes, I'm going to start, let's say 7:30. Let's just shoot for 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to go ahead and start book 2, which is I think it's the case, yeah, hold on, I'll grab it. Okay. Which is Case of the Left-Handed Lady, brought to you by the Finchburg Public Library in Wisconsin. Yay, Finchburg! This book was brought to you by Turner Branch Library from Kingston, Frontenac Public Library. Wherever that is, the Turner Branch. So, thank you, Kingston, Frontenac Public Library, for providing this book on eBay. So, alrighty. So, I'll be back in a few, gonna get some things set up. Please stay tuned if you want to catch the second book. If not, feel free to watch the rest of this one. And I will see you guys in a bit. Don't go too far.